This morning I want to continue clarifying a little bit some of these key or core principles that form some of the basic fundamental spiritual views that we might subscribe to, and clarify where the view that we're clinging to comes from, and how that attachment to view arises as a result of the way in which we've apprehended our experience, and how then subscribing to that view completely conditions the way in which we see the world, to the point where we would have people experiencing the same thing, which is life, arguing, warring with each other because they can't agree, thinking that oranges are oranges when another person thinks oranges are apples. So clearly view is at the root of our conflict, but it's also at the root of all our spiritual perspective. And the Buddha was urging us to free ourselves from this all-encompassing tangled net of views, so that we could learn to break through the veil of deluded perception or confused perception or partial perception and see clearly, what is this life? My friends, we've been living it every second with every breath since we were born, and we don't know what it is because we haven't learned to pay attention without putting our ideas in the way. And more importantly, we haven't learned to pay attention without pulling the perception of me at the center. So let's look today about where this idea of me comes from, and then even where this idea of the big I, the big self that comes from, that some spiritual teachers might talk about, this eternal self that some spiritual views would subscribe to. And then look at the way that some teachings are partially perceiving the nature of our reality, but not breaking through to see what's really there. So right at the heart of misconception is the idea of what this me, I is. To understand that, let's put on two sides the idea of me as a personality, the egoic I, where this comes from, and on the other side the idea of the big I, this ever-present witnessing presence that some spiritual views would claim is the primordial essence of our experience. So first of all, the egoic me. What is it? So we might subscribe to a view that says, this is who I am, I'm this. And that I that I subscribe to is basically a bundle of conditioning factors that make up my sense of who I am, my ideas, my attitudes, my views, the way I react to things, all of which I attach to as me and think of as part of my identity. Now, let's just think for a moment. On a day when you wake up feeling really well, you spring out of bed, and there's a joie de vivre, and you go about your things with full enthusiasm. Nothing can stop you or knock you off your perch. And yet you would be convinced that it is the same you that gets out of bed when you're feeling like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards on a bad hair day when you don't feel like doing anything. We would consider that to be the same person. And yet there is no similarity between the way you think, the way you feel, the way you look out upon the world. So this little self, egoic self, this, the Buddha teaches us, is an entirely conditioned state that is utterly dependent upon what conditioning factors, or what he would call karma, or past conditioning, is fruiting through our unconscious into our conscious in the moment to condition and prompt and push and drive the way our conscious mind works. So the Buddha calls this the eye maker. Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple, called this the eye maker. I call it the eye-making extravaganza, this endless need to keep adding ideas to this perception of myself with regards to who I think I am, this storyline I have going on inside me, and then the way I project myself to the world, the way I want the world to see me. All of this, we dream it up entirely within the mind, and it's a complete fabrication. None of it is real. And as soon as we start to meditate and enter even close, or come close to a state of unified concentration, all of that sense of me fades away and crumbles. So, attaching to the ego, this eye maker that constantly changes from one day to another, even to the point where I can be confused about what I think about something. There's constant forming of views and then attaching to them, is a mechanism that is created entirely in our mind. It's created momentarily and perceived momentarily by our perception, but is driven by our unconscious mind, arising through the heart base. The Buddha calls this bhavanga, this storehouse of karmic impressions and conditioning factors. What do we mean by that? Every time your mind reacts to anything, the charge around that reaction, for example, the aversion you have to something, that creates a charge within your psyche. It is a palpable charge that registers at the heart base, this very subtle mechanism that is receiving the impression of everything that you are experiencing and registering it in some way, even if it is not consciously. So think about it as a mirror that's made of water. When it's still, it reflects perfectly. Every time you react to anything, you throw a little pebble in that water. It creates a ripple that leaves an impression and then sinks to the bottom and becomes a stored charge, or what we call karma. So, as the surface of the heart becomes disturbed by various things in the life, so various past charges that we've accumulated bubble up to disturb the surface of the heart base, and so condition the way in which we perceive our reality. Because all of our conscious mind is driven by what we are feeling unconsciously. And what we feel consciously and unconsciously is driven by the charge that is arising through bhavanga, through the heart base, causing it to shake one way with excitement, one way with fear, one way with aversion, one way with craving, one way with worry. All of this vibration and shaking at the heart has a signature to it that feels like something, regardless of what we call it. And that feeling something is the prompt, the conditioning factor that drives the way our mind arises. And so, on a good day, the heart base is calm, it's settled, we slept well, we weren't disturbed yesterday. There wasn't too much bothering us in the daily life. The heart base is almost mirror-like. Nothing has surfaced from the unconscious to disturb us, and in the world things seem to be going well. And I get up and I feel $1 million. Top of the world. On the day that I've had a fretful day before, I slept poorly. My unconscious is surfacing charges through the heart base that disturb me, make me feel anxious, worried, maybe even afraid, angry. I get up, having had a night of that. My heart base is shaken. I hardly want to get out of bed. I don't feel capable of dealing with any of life's pressures. And yet I would consider that to be the same me. So this me, this I maker, this I making process is driven fundamentally by the charge that is surfacing from our unconscious, which is karma, our past accumulative tendencies. And then added to that, as if it wasn't complicated enough, the storyline, the ideas that I create with my own mind that I completely just dream up. And this is what I like to call the rabbit hole. For as long as we are convinced by what our mind is telling us, we are lost down a rabbit hole. We go down that rabbit hole looking for answers in our mind when our mind is just something that we're dreaming up constantly. It has no bearing, well, little bearing on reality. It's only when we come out of the rabbit hole and go, what? It's just this? And you look around you and you see, I was just sitting here all the time in this beautiful day with a cool breeze on my skin, the sound of the birds, the sea in the distance. Oh, what was that place that I was lost in my mind, deep down this rabbit hole, utterly convinced by it, thinking that it was real and thinking it was me, when I dreamed it up all the time. So the I maker, the egoic perspective, is driven by the charge that is arising through us, that is conditioning how we feel, from our unconscious through the heart base, fruiting as old karmic tendencies, or if you want, just call it past conditioning, the way we've reacted in the past. And then it's driven by what we're adding with our mind. These two aspects, my ideas, which I dreamed up, and how I'm feeling, which I accumulated over a lifetime of just reacting to things, none of which are the essence of the experience. None of them are fundamentally me. They are all just conditionally me. All right, so there you go. This is the small I, the ego, the little sense of me that I might think is who I am, but is constantly changing. A completely conditioned process. All right, now let's look at where the idea of this big I, maybe this soul, or whatever you might want to call it, comes from. Okay.